You've heard a lot of people lately say something to the effect of, that person's an illegal immigrant. They crossed the border. Sounds simple. It's also wrong, legally, factually, and procedurally. Hi, I'm Nate Charles, and welcome back to the Rule of Law Brief. I'm going to walk you through what actually happens when someone is fleeing persecution and seeks asylum in the United States. This is Mohammed. Mohammed is from Mauritania. If you're not familiar with Mauritania, it's a pretty rough place. Google it. Now, don't worry, Mohammed is not a real person. Mohammed is actually an amalgamation of many clients that we have here at Charles International Law. But the story we're going to tell is pretty typical of a lot of those clients. And according to a lot of people, Mohammed is an illegal immigrant because he crossed the southern border into the United States. But let's walk through what Mohammed actually experienced to get here. Mohammed didn't leave because he wanted a better job. He left because staying in Mauritania was not safe. He was targeted because of who he is, what he believes, or something he cannot change. At some point, Mohammed makes a decision. If I stay, something bad is going to happen to me. So he leaves, quickly, and with very little. Sometimes not even with the proper documentation. Now, we need to take a pause here and talk about why Mohammed can't just come here legally. You hear a lot of people say it. Why didn't Mohammed just get on a plane and come here legally? Because he can't. I mean, literally, there is no way for him to do it. Mohammed can't just walk into an airport, buy a ticket to the United States, and get on a plane. The airport will check his passport. They will check to make sure he has a visa. And if he doesn't have a visa to enter the United States, they won't let him get on board because the airline itself can be fined and required to send him back to where he was. Now, Mohammed can't just go get a visa either because, one, it's probably not going to be approved, and two, he doesn't have time. He is running for his life. So, Mohammed has to find another way. He flies to a country that he actually can enter, and usually it's Nicaragua. So, after Mohammed has flown through sometimes 5 or 6 different countries to get to Nicaragua, the only place where he can enter without a prearranged visa, he starts the long journey north up through Central America and Mexico to reach the United States. That journey is long and dangerous. It involves overland travel through multiple countries. He spends money that he really doesn't have. And frequently, people in his position rely on smugglers to get them through these relatively austere environments to the United States. Those smugglers aren't in it to protect him. They're in it for the money. Sometimes they exploit him, sometimes they extort him. And in a way that is incredibly legally problematic for Mohammed, when they finally get close to the United States, frequently those smugglers won't let him go through the legal checkpoints. They don't want scrutiny from law enforcement. So instead, Mohammed is forced, frequently at gunpoint, to cross between ports of entry, to go through the wall. So now Mohammed is in the United States. What does he do? He doesn't disappear. He doesn't hide. He walks down the road until he finds Customs and Border Protection and turns himself in. And he says, I'm afraid to go back to Mauritania. Now, let's be clear. If Mohammed goes through the wall and doesn't go through the designated port of entry, he has actually committed a misdemeanor. He has entered the United States without inspection. That is actually a crime. But here's the thing. The story that I'm telling you right now is almost identical if you actually do go through the designated port of entry. And this is very important, Mohammed has a right to seek asylum even if his entry wasn't authorized, even if he did commit a crime coming through the border without inspection. Now, again, we have to take another pause to talk about why that is. This isn't just policy. This is the law. This is the immigration law of the United States, despite the fact that a lot of people don't want to believe it. Long before our modern asylum system existed, there was already a well-established rule in international law, non-refoulement. The gist of non-refoulement is that you do not send a person back to where they're likely to be persecuted, tortured, or killed. That principle has existed for well over a century. Despite the doctrine of non-refoulement, before World War II, there were many countries who turned away people fleeing Nazi persecution.
Just months before the start of World War II, over 900 Jewish citizens of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich make a bold, desperate bid to escape the Führer's genocidal grip. From Hamburg, they board the St. Louis, a luxury liner bound for Havana, Cuba. Now the ship lays an anchor in Havana's picturesque harbor. Despite visas and assurances from the Cuban government that they would be welcomed, the Jewish refugees are told that they will not be allowed in Cuba and must leave the harbor. For these nomads of the sea, Returning to Hitler's Germany means facing a bleak future full of hatred, persecution, and almost certain death. If no nation in the world will step forward to save these Jews, what will happen to the countless others who remain in Germany?
The MS St. Louis ship was a German ship, and basically these refugees who were on the ship were fleeing for their life out of Germany in 1939. We could never find my mother's name actually on the passenger list, but we do have her luggage ticket. She was alone. She was 19 years old. She was born in Leipzig, Germany, and her family paid for her passage on the St. Louis. Those that went to England were the lucky ones, primarily, because the rest did not survive. So there was about over 200 passengers went to England. The rest of her family died in Auschwitz and Majdanek, which were Nazi death camps, concentration camp and death camp, yeah. So she lost everyone.
And as a result of those horrendous tragedies, our asylum system had to evolve. The global asylum system is now formalized and codified in treaties like the Refugee Convention and even the Genevan Conventions, which govern combat. And today, most of those concepts have been incorporated into U.S. law. So back to Mohammed. Once Mohammed crosses into the United States, that's when his journey really begins. He is probably going to be detained for a period of time. While he's in detention, Customs and Border Protection is going to do everything they can to figure out who he is and determine whether or not he poses a threat to the United States. He's also going to go through what's called a credible fear interview. If he fails his credible fear interview, he's going to be subjected to expedited removal. If, during that interview, Customs and Border Protection or USCIS determines that there's at least a reasonable chance that he actually is a valid asylum seeker, that still doesn't mean he wins. It means he gets to stay in the United States just long enough to prove his case in immigration court. Now, once Customs and Border Protection determines that he is not a threat to the United States and he has passed his reasonable fear interview, he is likely to be released into the country. But that's not the end of his troubles. Here's something that most people don't realize. Mohammed isn't even allowed to work once he gets here. By law, asylum seekers have to wait at least 150 days before they can even apply for a work authorization, and in practice, that process is usually much longer. Delays, either by the alien himself or by the processing of the paperwork within the U.S. government, can extend that timeline significantly. So for months, sometimes even years, Mohammed is in the United States without any legal ability to earn anything. If Mohammed is super lucky, he will find a law firm like Charles International Law. Depending on his circumstances, a law firm like ours will put Mohammed on a payment plan where he won't have to start paying his bills until he gets a job after 6 months. And take notice that Mohammed hasn't even started preparing his case for trial yet. After a few months, Mohammed will go to a master calendar hearing. At that master calendar hearing, an immigration judge will confirm that Mohammed understands the United States is trying to deport him and asks him what he wants to do about that. If Mohammed has the wherewithal to ask for asylum, the immigration court will give him about 6 months to a year to prepare his case. Now, in that case, at that trial, Mohammed will have to prove that he was persecuted or will be, that it's for a legally protected reason, and that his government cannot or will not protect him. If he has a good lawyer, his lawyer will tell him what sort of documents that he needs to prove his case, which he may or may not even be able to get. And he may not have a lawyer at all. And if he can't establish that list of things that I just mentioned, he loses and he goes back to where he came from. If, and only if, Mohammed actually wins asylum, he can stay. And after 1 year, he can apply for a green card. 5 years after that, he may become a citizen. That's a very long path, even under ideal circumstances. But importantly, after he has passed his reasonable fear interview, but before he goes to trial on his asylum claim, he is here legally. Now, in a legal sense, he has not been admitted to the United States. That only happens once you actually earn asylum. But he is here legally. But let's be honest, not everyone in Mohammed's position qualifies. Some people file weak claims. Some people file good claims, but they just can't prove it because the documentary evidence doesn't exist. And to be fair, there are some people who try to game the system. That's real. But it's certainly not everyone. So we come down to the question, is Mohammed an illegal immigrant? Or is Mohammed someone who used the only path available to him? Is Mohammed someone who is invoking legal protection that exists for a good reason? Seeking asylum is not illegal. In fact, it is one of the most important humanitarian rights that exists under U.S. law. And for a lot of people like Mohammed, it may be the only thing standing between him and torture or certain death.